We're on air. You may now begin.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us here to mark the launch of the Global Information Technology Report 2015. My name is Oliver Kahn. I work in the public engagement team at the World Economic Forum. Today's launch goes with the headline, "The Digital Poverty Holding Back Global Growth and Development." It's not an overly cheerful headline. I think there are some worrying findings here. We'll keep going into those in great detail over the course of this session. I would also very much invite you to share with us via social media, on Twitter and Facebook, any questions you have, which will then be used and can then be used to shape and form this discussion. We're going to try to get as much value out of this 45-minute session as possible, so I'm going to keep my words to a minimum. I will just, however, introduce my panel. I'm delighted to be joined with today, each of who will say a few words, and then we'll have a free-flowing, hopefully dynamic conversation regarding the state of information technology and whether it's being leveraged to the effect it might be to drive economic growth and improve social development. The first speaker up is my colleague from the World Economic Forum, Thierry Geiger. He's a senior economist and a co-editor of this report. Following Thierry will be Sumitra Dutta, the Dean of the Allen Elmer Linsbeth Samuel Curtis Johnson Graduate School of Management at Cornell University, another long-term collaborator with the forum on this report, and delighted to be joined by Sumitra in our New York office. Next, we have Bruno Lanvin, another long-term partner and friend of the forum's executive director at INSEAD's European Competitiveness Initiative. Dr. Robert Pepper is our next speaker, Vice President of Global Technology Policy at Cisco, and very delighted again to be joined in Istanbul, I believe, by Bajat Al-Dawish, who's a partner at Strategy and leader of the firm's communications, media, and technology practice in the Middle East. We're going to start, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, with Thierry just giving us a broad overview of this year's findings. Thierry.
Thank you very much, Ollie, and thank you everybody for watching this webinar. I'm going to give you a very brief overview of these results and reports. If you can, a few slides we're gonna show. So I believe you see them now. Basically, it's the 14th edition of this Global Information Technology Report. It's the result of a collaboration between INSEAD, the World Economic Forum, and Cornell University, and benefit from the support of Cisco and Strategy and all of these companies and organizations are present on today's webinar, and it's a pleasure. The report features the Network Readiness Index, which is a model which is used to track the IT revolution around the world. So basically, we measure the drivers of network readiness, and by what network readiness we mean the capacity of countries to leverage ICT for increased competitiveness and well-being. So this model it's an index, covers 143 economies, is made up of 4 main components: environment, readiness, usage, and impacts. And we are, each of these buckets or categories are further subdivided into what we call pillars. And if you go to slide number 3, you will see the structure of the index. Thank you. 10 pillars distributed into these 4 components. And as you see, it's a multitude of factors that allow countries to benefit from ICT. It's not just about usage, it's not just about having access to the technology, but it's also having the skills and having the right digital ecosystem to really make the most of the ICT revolution. So this index helps us to produce the rankings that you've probably seen today in the news. And on the next slide, we're gonna introduce you to some of the highlights of this year's results. So Singapore's this year tops the league as the most network-ready country in the world, taking over Finland. As you see in the top 10, 7 of them are from Europe. So the European countries continue to dominate the rankings, especially the Nordic countries, Finland, Sweden, Norway, and lower you would find in the top 20 Denmark as well as Iceland. So very strong dominance of European countries, joined in the top 10 by Singapore, of course, the US at number 7, and Japan at number 10. Japan climbs 6 places in this year's ranking, one of the biggest jumps among the best performing countries. Elsewhere in the world, what you see is, for example, is Estonia leading the Baltics at 22nd. A very strong push, and the rise of the Baltics is one of the remarkable findings of this year's report. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, really strong push towards the digital economy, and this is very remarkable. Elsewhere, you have UAE, the United Arab Emirates, as well as Qatar leading in the MENA region. You have in developing Asia, you have Malaysia at 32nd, well ahead of all other developing Asian countries. We also noticed the relative disappointing performance of the BRICS. Russia is 41st, but China 62nd only, South Africa 75th, Brazil and India are even lower. It's a concern for the growth of these economies, this relative inability to harness technology to sustain the growth momentum in these large economies. A lot of insights and nuggets coming out of this year's rankings. We could talk about Mauritius at 45th, well ahead of all the other sub-Saharan African countries. The next country is Seychelles and South Africa, which are 75th and 76th respectively. So Mauritius really in a league of its own when it comes to Africa. Very difficult capacity or big ability to harness technology on the African continent. I won't go over the results. We might come back to it during the course of the conversation. I just wanted to highlight some of the key messages on the next slide. If we can bring up the next slide. Thank you. What is emerging from this year's report is that the ICT revolution, this incredible transformative power of ICT, is only happening in a few countries and is only benefiting a few people on this planet. We still observe widespread digital poverty, and we also observe digital divides emerging not only across countries but within countries, between those who are able to access ICT and have the skills to make the most of it, and the other people, other segments of population who are not able to harness technology to their full potential because of their age, because of their education, because of lack of money or access. So this is something we want to highlight. There is a persisting and even widening digital divide across and within countries. Also, we should not kid ourselves. The mobile revolution that has happened and that has put mobile phone in the hands of 3.5 billion people on the planet is only part one of this IT revolution. 60% of the population has never gone online yet. So, and only when internet will have reached, universal penetration, we will see the full potential of the IT revolution. And this is what we need to do: is to really step up efforts to bring fast, reliable, affordable, and universal internet to the world. And only then these incredible transformations will happen. The reports contains a number of solutions by leading experts and practitioners. We will hear from them today during the conversation. So the first part of the report is really the diagnosis. The Network Readiness Index is a diagnosis tool. It gives a picture of the state of network readiness around the world, and the subsequent chapters provide solution on how to bridge the divides, how to make this ICT revolution a reality for everybody. I'll stop here and hand over to Ollie. Thank you.
Thank you, Thierry. Limited benefits, widespread digital poverty, lots more work to be done. Soumitra, do you share this rather dark prognosis? You've been involved in this field and in this report in particular for quite some time now. What is your own personal take on the findings in this year's report?
Yeah, thank you, Ollie, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this important webinar on the dissemination of the global IT report results. Your question is a very important one, Ollie, and reflecting back upon the last 15 years that we have been working on this report in different editions, I recall more than a decade ago, most of the excitement and enthusiasm was around the spread and diffusion of technology. And there were a lot of concerns around the digital divide in access to technology. And there was a sense, perhaps a false sense of hope, that by increasing access, one would reap the benefits of technology penetration, of technology progress. Now, a decade later, the results are giving us a very compelling message about the limits of the digital revolution. As Thierry said, we have to shift the focus from the digital divide to the digital dividend. This does not mean that we have solved all the issues of the digital divide. There are lots of emerging digital areas on which there are big differences that emerge both inside countries and across countries. But I think the most important message that I take from this year's result is that we have to start working on the digital dividend. How do we ensure that societies, regions, governments, countries get the benefits of increased investments and increased diffusion of technology? And for me, this is a matter in which we should really shed our complacency, which may have developed over the last decade, into a sense of urgency. And I say this because, when you go to various technology meetings, people often very proudly and correctly so state that today there are more mobile phones than the population of the world. It's a great result and we should be very happy about it. But that often tends to give people a sense of complacency, that just by having cheaper access to technology, we have really solved the problems. But what the GITR results are showing this year is the problems go and the challenges go far beyond just access, and we need to have a collective sense of urgency to try to enhance our ability to reap the digital dividend. And this will not happen alone by one partner or one player. We need a concerted collective action across both government, the private sector, civil society, and other interested players in this domain. Thank you.
So, all very, very important points, Soumitra, and we'll be certainly looking into those questions during this debate, switching from access to reaping the dividends and trying to shed that sense of complacency. Before we do, I do want to go back to the digital divide and the access issue for a time. Bruno Lanvin, one of our recurring themes, as Soumitra has just alluded to, in fact, is the fact that there is a digital divide within countries as well as across countries. What is your state on that dynamic in 2015?
Well, thank you, Ollie, and hello, everyone. Indeed, about 15 years ago, French economist Elie Cohen said that globalization was about reducing disparities between countries while inequalities were increasing inside those national economies. And he saw that as one of the greatest dangers of globalization. And ICT is probably the area in which we've seen this phenomenon with the most acute degree of veracity. Indeed, we see in all countries, developed and developing, that inequalities between those who have access to technology and those who have not access to technology is increasing. So we are far from inclusive growth. Yet there's a big difference between international divide and domestic divides. International divides are largely and almost exclusively linked to income per capita. In other words, the rich countries have more access, more use, more impact, and the poor countries are lagging behind. And this is not diminishing. Inside the countries, inequalities and lack of inclusiveness is often linked to other types of disparities, not just income. It's about geography between urban and rural areas, and it is more and more about different access to education. Those who have the capacities to understand what coding is about, what information technology can bring to daily activities, to use e-government services online, have more opportunity to benefit from it. And this inequality, again, is not exclusively linked to income, and it can be fought. It can be addressed by appropriate policies, appropriate regulatory instruments. So it is indeed a source of concern, but it is also something we should not be totally sad about, because it is relatively easy to be corrected. It's a question of action, of coordination between stakeholders, as Soumitra just said, and it can be done, and we have examples of countries where this has been done.
Thanks, Bruno. And again, I'd like to hear more about those examples and what exactly are the major lessons and the best case studies. How can we collectively act to create better impact in this field? Before we do, again, I'm just going to go to Dr. Robert Pepper from Cisco. Robert, I'm going to read a passage from the first paragraph of the chapter you contributed to this report. It talks about telecommunications as an engine of growth and a major source of employment and prosperity, which are great words indeed. And they were taken from the Maitland report, which was written and commissioned by the ITU in 1985. So 30 years on, I'm going to ask you to don a self-reflective hat and perhaps give us your thoughts on what kind of record the technology industry has achieved in those years, in that intervening period, towards driving towards great prosperity and jobs.
Thanks, Ollie. I'm actually, I think, the optimist here, and I say that because when we go back and take a look at the Maitland report, right, and the recommendation in the Maitland report was that because of the economic benefit of having a telephone, they said everybody on the planet should have access to a telephone, and what that meant 30 years ago was that everybody should be within at least a one-day walk of a telephone, right? If 30 years ago we had suggested that 4 or 5 billion people on the planet would have telephones in their pockets, they would have laughed at us. I actually think that we've made huge progress. There's a tremendous amount that yet needs to be done. But when we take a look at the data, what we see is that ICT is helping reduce global income inequality country to country. The countries that are not connected, they're not progressing. But virtually every country today sees being connected as an imperative. And in fact, if you drill down on some of the BRICS data, Terry, that you mentioned, some of the countries, South Africa, for example, actually improved in its absolute NRI score, but it fell in its ranking because other countries are improving faster. There are a number of countries, Germany, France, Spain, in Europe, that improved in their absolute score on the ranking, but fell in the relative rankings because other countries are improving faster. We know that connecting improves improves income. Broadband is an income multiplier. The problem is if those who are connected are improving and they're growing, the people who are not connected, countries that are not connected, companies that are not connected, households that are not connected, if they're not connected, they're going to fall further behind because those who are connected are benefiting from the multiplier effect of being connected to ICTs. That is the paradox. That is the huge paradox that we see in this year's, that comes from the research that we did with this year's report, right? ICT connectivity and broadband can close the gaps, but if you're not connected, you fall further behind. So we can talk more about some prescriptions later of what to do about it, but we've already heard some of it. It's not just the access. It's not just the supply side deployment. It's the usage. It's what I tend to talk about or think about as the demand side. It is how do people, not only connect, but use and integrate and benefit and get value from being connected. So frankly, from what we now know, it is just, in my mind, not acceptable if somebody is not connected. It's not acceptable if a country is not connected. It's not acceptable if a household is not connected. We're not going to go back and unconnect or disconnect people who are already connected, and we know that they benefit. So if we want the benefits to be global, we have to connect everybody, and it's not just being physically connected, it's using it in ways that people get value.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. And again, touching on some really important questions, and continuing that segue from supply side to talking about demand side. Bajat, I'm referring to your chapter here when I read that 80% of Wikipedia articles are written in just 28 languages, whereas 80% of the world's population speaks one of 80 languages. There's a huge discrepancy there, obviously, and there's obviously a very one-sided approach when it comes to content and to services on the internet. Given your experience working in the Gulf region and further afield in your practice, what are the impressions you're picking up from the ability of content and services to drive take-up and address this issue we're talking about of getting a digital dividend from IT? Thank you,
Uli. Indeed, this question about content and services is spot on as part of this discussion. As Soumitra explained, today affordable access is being addressed, and the population has to mobile infrastructure or even internet infrastructure. But we're seeing that even those who have access are not using the internet or benefiting from the advantages of being online. And the question we wanted to focus on this year is, how do you measure the progress of your digital content and service ecosystem in order to support and bridging the digital divide or the digital dividend in your models? You mentioned one interesting statistic. Another one is in a survey with those who are offline in the US, 34% mentioned the reason why they are offline. They do not see an interest in what's being offered on the internet. So the first question is, look, how do you make sure the content and services provide incentives and use case for the countries you have in order to get online and benefit? The second question is, how do you make sure the sustainability of these digital content and services is there? In large markets where advertising is well developed, you may have a solution, but in other markets where the advertising spend is not developed, this is an issue. So look, we look at all these, and naturally there is no silver bullet, but there is a combination of solutions between governments, content developers, as well as enablers like telecom operators and brand owners. And you will see that different markets who have different economic characteristics will have different means to do that. For example, in the US, where 70% of the economy is driven by consumer spend, the solutions you need are different from a market like Qatar, where 70% of the economy is driven by government spend. Hence, you will see in the US what triggered the development of digital content and services was really entrepreneurs who were after the first mover advantage, who went into building scale, so recollecting eyeballs, and then attracted the advertising spend. Whereas in markets like Qatar, or even Germany or Korea, what helped trigger the growth in digital content and services was government-sponsored services around e-government, e-edition, and so on.
Thank you, Bajay. That was fascinating, and it gives a real glimpse into the different models and the different pace and model of evolution in various regions of the world, with the with parts of Europe and North America seeing a private sector-led evolution and a more government interventionist model in areas such as the Gulf. Just to stick on that subject, Bajay, what would be your model for government intervention in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, where, as Thierry mentioned, we only have, I believe, 3 countries in the top half. Do you have any without wishing to ask you to identify the silver bullet? We know there is not one. Any best practice measures that you believe could be applied relatively painlessly and relatively straightforwardly to address this?
Look, we're seeing a number of solutions in sub-Saharan Africa. First of all, government policy in terms of facilitating entrepreneurship innovation in the digital content and service space. We're also seeing some interesting cooperation initiative between global content developers and telecom operators. Case in point, the Internet.org and Facebook Hero initiative. So we're seeing interventions from the government, but also from other players. And I would say the key here is how do the stakeholders cooperate to make it work? Because the government may not involve the telecom operators and without the global players. At the beginning, you need to over-invest in content development. Really, you need to have mass in order to see the creation of a critical mass and a network effect. And this needs players like global content developers such as Facebook, Google, and the others. So we're seeing these cooperation initiatives in a number of markets, complemented by local innovation initiatives in these markets.
Local innovation there being key. Robert, I know that you have views on this subject too. What's your view on the role of how far should governments step in and drive this transformation if indeed the private sector can be successful in its own means in certain parts of the world?
So thanks, Ali. And by the way, I agree with the comments that it's not either or, it's a combination. So I'm the optimist, as I said, but I'm also impatient. So I'm an impatient optimist, and as a result, we have 5 policy recommendations, or recommended 5 policy actions as part of the work we did this year with the report. And some of those go directly to government, and some are about private sector and government working together, especially in emerging economies. First, there does need to be public resources and incentives for building broadband internet access out to underserved, unserved, and rural areas. And there is a role for government to do that, especially creating the right incentives, and in some instances having to figure out how to possibly even fund. But most of the investment is from the private sector, but government can facilitate that quite dramatically. Second recommendation is much more within the government's purview, and that is, and one of the most powerful things that I've seen is when schools and classrooms and every student is connected. So we have as our second recommendation connecting every school and library to broadband internet service to ensure widespread connectivity within the schools. So that means connecting every classroom. The youth are our future. They also are the part of the population that is using ICT and the internet more than older people. But we need to make it absolutely available and using it for education. And so connecting schools is important. Third, unfortunately, in many countries, there are very, very high taxes on internet service, on mobile phones, on internet equipment. In fact, in some countries, internet services and equipment are treated as luxuries. In some countries, the taxes are so high, they're the same as alcohol or tobacco, what are called sin taxes. Broadband access, internet access is not a sin. It's not a luxury. It's essential. We view, as I've said, broadband access as one of the essential infrastructures, along with water, electricity, and transportation, and therefore we shouldn't be taxing it as though it's a luxury or a sin. And there's some really good examples. In Colombia, in 2007, Colombia eliminated the excise tax on personal computers. They were previously seen as luxuries for rich people. When they did that over a 2-year period, household adoption of PCs increased 110%. Internet access increased dramatically. Ironically, or maybe it's not ironic, is overall tax revenue went up 83% because of the demand stimulation of more people buying, right? It was so much more activity. So taxes actually went up, even though the tax rate went way, way, way down, and that made it much more affordable. Fourth recommendation, we really need to develop robust ICT training, curriculum, and programs. Bruno, you talked about this. Many people, and Bajat, you did. I mean, a lot of people are not connected because they don't see value, or in some parts of the world they're afraid. Again, part of this is an education function that's a combination of government and private sector. And giving people skills is critical, including things that Cisco and Microsoft and Google, a lot of companies are doing. We have our networking academy. We currently have over 1 million students globally. We've had more than 5 million students go through the program. And then the fifth recommendation is we absolutely have to close the gender gap in ICT. What we see in many countries is that women and girls are not being connected to the internet at the same proportion as the general population or males. And what we also know is that in many countries, when women are connected to the internet, they tend to use it more for education, savings, and other activities that we want to see. And that, again, it's just not acceptable that there is a gender divide in using the internet and broadband. And we believe if those 5 actions are taken, and a lot of those are with the role of government, that we can see the digital divide be closing, we can see more adoption, we can see all of the benefits be distributed much, much more widely. So being impatient, I'd love to see governments adopt these recommendations.
Bruno, where do you stand on the patient scale in terms of government? What are you seeing as good ways that they could intervene more effectively?
Well, first I'd like to just stress what Bajat said on international cooperation, regional cooperation. This is an area where governments have a key role to play in all parts of the world. And Robert just described very eloquently some of the key policy issues that need to be addressed. So I'd like to add to that 2 elements only. One is that government have a critical role to play in maintaining a healthy balance between competition and regulation, and they have to be imaginative about it. The second one is that the production of a national vision is critically important to convince people that there is value in ICT, private and public sector alike. But this does not necessarily mean an ICT vision. It means that government should know what they want and be able to express it. If the national goal is innovation, if it is economic diversification, if it is competitiveness, it needs to be spelled out. And then the benefits stemming from ICT should be linked to that. The secret of a vision is not to be well articulated, it's in its implementation. As a colleague of mine at the World Bank was fond of saying, a vision without an implementation is called an hallucination. So we can all have visions, but if we want to implement it clearly, identifying the benefits of ICT is going to become more and more important in making it an implementable vision.
Thanks, Bruno. I'm going to move on now, and I want to go back to the rankings for a brief time. and I'm going to ask this question to my colleague Thierry. We hear a lot about the middle income trap. It's possibly an abused term, and yet at the same time, we don't see great forward traction. And indeed, we see backwards traction by 3 of the 5 BRICS. We see Russia climbing, we see China holding steady on 62nd. Some of the other larger emerging markets, likewise, are not producing stellar results in terms of the Network Readiness Index. And indeed, as you mentioned, the faster improving countries tend to be those smaller, arguably more adroit countries that seem to be getting policies correct. Is there a middle income trap? Is it realistic to expect that 5 years from now, the top 10 of the GITR Network Readiness Index could look amazingly different, could be less dominated by European and developed Asian and North American economies?
Thanks, Ollie. Well, I'm not sure that there's such a dramatic change within such short time, but we do see some countries, improving quite fast in the rankings, and you have example in the Caucasus, for example, Armenia or Georgia, which are not at the top of the ranking yet, but they've kind of made great strides of 10, 20 places over the past 4 years. We also have examples in Central America, where Costa Rica and Panama, I mentioned them before. They've been really leapfrogging in the rankings. When it comes to the large economies and the BRICS in particular, it is indeed a concern that they've not been able to connect or to harness technology in order to sustain the growth momentum. And I mean, all these countries are at very different stages of development. Brazil is much richer than India, but I think there is a bit of a complacency, like Sumitra was mentioning, in those countries, where they've been busy, addressing some of the basic issues like infrastructure, health, or education, but they've maybe failed to see the potential of ICT in bringing growth and sustaining growth, and some countries have been much better at that. So I think it's the need to realize that ICT plays a critical role in lifting up or driving development, and in India, there is sometimes, the belief that India is this, innovation powerhouse because of Bangalore and a few pockets of excellence. But it turns out that a vast majority of Indians have never gone online. There is a huge part of rural India which is not yet connected. Exact same situation in China. Yes, the coast is extremely well connected and innovative. You have corporate giants in the IT sector which have become leaders in their field globally, but yet you have large pockets of digital poverty persisting throughout the country. Exact same story in Brazil and South Africa, for that matter. So I think that the middle income trap is the risk of this trap is actually magnified by the lack of technological readiness.
Thanks, Thierry. Robert, you've talked about the fact that some countries, such as those we just discussed, are going up the rankings, or rather are growing their score, are increasing their network readiness, but they're not doing it fast enough. What's your take on the middle income trap viewed through the lens of our network readiness index?
Yeah, so two quick comments. One is, if we fast forward 20 years, we can aspire that every country is going to have a, right? So this is a score. The best you can do is 7, right, Terry? So yes. It'd be great if every country is above 6, because there's no country there today. A handful, 2 or 3 countries are at 6.04 or something, right? So if every country were above 6, we'd still have rankings, but everybody would be beyond the threshold and we'd be in great shape. That is what we should aspire to. So if we fast forward 20 years, I'm less concerned about relative ranking rather than absolute score in terms of the ability for countries to transform and use the ICT connectivity to transform their economies and societies. So that, in my mind, that's what we should aspire to. But going to this middle income trap, where, by the way, China improved in its absolute score, but it stayed the same at 62nd. As more countries see this as important, they're going to be improving, and the improvement, it is about speed of improvement. And there is another point which Bruno has made, and I love it. It's this is really too important just to leave to the techies, right? Because it's a lot of it is on the demand side. It is about the education. It's about the value that comes from not just deployment and adoption and usage, but it's integration. How do we use the ICT in our daily lives and business and education? That's where we get the value. And that's not an issue having to do, that's not the techies. I work for a tech company. We love the tech world, right? That's what we do. But we're only the enablers on the technology side. There's so much more that needs to be done in the broader ecosystem to get the value out of the connectivity.
Thanks, Robert. Sumitra, I'm going to ask you a question now that's just come in from one of our Twitter followers in Poland. Poland is the GDP growth leader in Europe, but yet it comes very low in the rankings, and it's a country that avoided the recession this time, and that's correct. So how do we rationalize that? How do we justify Poland's economic overachievement with the fact that from the perspective of our index, that it still has a lot of work to do to really reach the kind of impacts from technology that it could be reaching?
Yeah, so clearly every country's trajectory is unique and is it's different in a way. If I look at the rankings for this year, I think Poland has improved its ranking from 54 last year to 50 this year. So there is progress that is also reflected in the Network Readiness Index. Now, having said this, I refer back to a lot of the issues that were raised earlier by my colleagues on this panel. Progress economically, progress from a development point of view is a function of multiple attributes, and technology is one of the key attributes, but it's not the only attribute. So I think Poland has to continue to make good progress on the various dimensions, and I certainly do hope that its overall ranking will rise and will continue to improve as the economy and its economic development trajectory also keeps on improving.
Thanks, Sumitra. Let's stay in Europe. Actually, we spend a lot of time talking about the emerging and developing world, but I'm quite keen to actually have your thoughts, and anyone else on our panel, on what next for the star players in our index, of the Singapores, the Nordics, the United States. We're seeing a high level of impact from the technology, both societally and economically. What should be the priorities for them? I'm guessing you're not going to say that it's time to be complacent. I guess you're going to tell me there's still much work to be done. But where should those countries be specifically looking at to continue their momentum?
So clearly the leaders in our rankings from around the world, not just only in Europe and in Asia, they are doing many things right. So let's acknowledge and recognize the fact that most of them have done and implemented a number of actions correctly over the last couple of decades, or in some cases even beyond that. So their position is not a mere accident today. So it's a result of a lot of good work. And the first recommendation really is that they should continue on that path of doing a lot of the good policy developments, a lot of the good infrastructure developments that they've been investing in over the last 10 years or beyond. The other recommendation that I would make for these economies is that they are really leaders, and they're pioneers, and they're innovators. And what is happening today is we are really reaching a stage at which technology is transformational for companies, it's transformational society, transformational government. And I think these economies should really push the pedal and accelerate the pace of transformation if they really want to be true leaders and global pioneers in the various domains that they intend to dominate. So for me, focus on transformation, which is very much linked to impact, focus on the various elements that drive a successful transformation, including the human dimension, including the policy dimension, including the institutional framework dimension, all key aspects on which I would recommend that these economies, or the leaders of these economies, continue to focus on in the coming years.
Now we're coming to a close now. We have very little time left, but before we do close this session, I'm very keen to ask all of you on the panel your thoughts on how to give me one great example that you've seen over the past 12 months of impact really being achieved either societally or economically through IT. And I'd also like you to each give me one priority. If we could achieve one thing in the coming 12 months, one thing which takes forward the digital dividend, brings it nearer to people or increases impact, please give me that as well. Robert, I'm going to ask you to kick off proceedings.
Sure. So one of the countries we talk about BRICS, Mexico, because if you take a look at the economics of Mexico, it's right there with the BRICS. Mexico jumped 10 points within the last year, 10 rankings among countries, and increased significantly its absolute score. And part of that is, very frankly, the investment that's being made in building out broadband, building out internet access in Mexico as a result of some of the regulatory competition reforms that we've been talking about today. So that's one very concrete example where some what might appear to be minor changes have a huge impact, and I think that's been quite important. In terms of some specific things within the next year that can be done, there are a couple of levers that I've already talked about that governments can make some very specific decisions. They can make them very quickly, and they can make a difference very quickly. And I'm not going to repeat them. I've already talked about those.
Thanks very much, Bajat. What's your sense working in the field of telecoms and media and technology in the Gulf, but also further afield?
Look, two comments. First of all, going back to Robert's optimism, I'm also optimistic when it comes to emerging markets advancing terms and digitization. I go back to the example of Qatar. In 2001, when we started the NRI, Qatar was lagging Arab countries on the NRI. It was really in the last quartile. And within 10 years, Qatar became number one. Actually, last year it was leading the Arabs on the NRI, and this year it's among the top 2 or 3. So this is an example where within 12 years, a country was able to move from being a laggard to being a leader in its category. So what this naturally a combination of putting ICT not only as a priority, but economic and social development and doing all the other things that were mentioned on the call today. The other thing I want to emphasize on is the digital dividend question. Today, from the telecom world, a telecom operator can reduce its capex efficiency or increase its capex efficiency by 3 when deploying LTE versus second generation mobile networks. So there is a lot of efficiency to be gained on the cost of providing megabits of mobile broadband data. So addressing the digital dividend is key. It will help change the economics of the equation and make mobile broadband much more affordable to many of those who are not connected today.
Thanks very much, Bajat. Bruno, you've been talking about visions and not hallucinations. What's your prognosis for the year ahead, and give us again one more example of some really good action you've seen in the past year?
Well, one of the things that I find exciting, because it makes us even more optimistic and even more impatient than Robert is today, is the success of Mauritius. Mauritius shows that the sub-Saharan economy can move up. It's now 45th, still improving its score of last year. And I'm quite fascinated by the similarities between the champion of this year, Singapore and Mauritius. Both are small island countries, and there is no reason why Mauritius should not follow the path opened by Singapore. One of the typical similarities I see between these two economies is not just in the determination of the government to say ICT is important, it can help us bring a more inclusive kind of dynamic society. It's in the fact that those two countries are very open societies. They're multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-confessional societies. And it seems that there is a recipe for success there. If we want to use global open communication, we have to use not only open economies, be open to trade, open to investment, open to technology, but also cultivate our open minds. And what I've seen both in Singapore and in Mauritius tell me that there are clearly success stories we can build on.
Thanks, Bruno. Soumitra, over to you in New York for your closing thoughts.
So in fact, I have a very good example of a key transformation that has enabled a technology that's happening right now in New York City. Mayor Bloomberg, a few years ago, he realized that the economy of New York City needed that dose of technology, innovation, technology, entrepreneurship. So he had a global competition to invite a major university into the city. Cornell won the competition, and now Cornell is setting up a whole innovation-focused university on Roosevelt Island. The city has in fact given half the island to Cornell University. It's a fantastic example of how a major city in the US, a major global city of the world, is trying to renew its competitiveness, renew its economy by forming a collaborative partnership across the government, across education, across the private sector, and with civil society. And I can give you a number of examples, but this is a wonderful reminder of how even the most advanced cities and advanced economies need to continually renew the leadership using technology as a key enabler, but it all depends on an effective partnership.
Thanks very much, Soumitra. Thierry, you've been living and breathing this report now for quite some time. What's the headline you want to see next year when we produce this 2016 GITR?
Well, before seeing the headline or trying to come up with a headline, I would like to see better data. Exercise trying to measure the state of the IT revolution around the world is still very much hindered by the lack of good data, especially when it comes to measuring the impact of ICT. So in the coming months and coming years, we would like to see more timely, more accurate data on various topics that relate to ICTs. We know that the UN has made a plea for data revolution. We echo this plea, and we really call on governments to improve statistical capacity when it comes to measuring ICT concepts, and this will then allow us to better track and measure the IT revolution.
Thanks very much, Thierry. Well, we've now overshot, which is most unbecoming for a Swiss organisation. I hold my hand up there for allowing this fascinating conversation to continue. We're moving. It seems to be that the narrative is moving in this 14th year of the report, moving from the divides of a digital dividend. We still it seems to be a sense of complacency there. Soumitra's point. Optimism seems to be the dominant emotion on this panel. In fact, an impatient optimism. I think we're moving towards impatience as the session progressed. Finally, plea for better data from Thierry Geiger. If you can't measure, you can't improve. And I speak for Thierry and his colleagues in our benchmarking team of the World Economic Forum. And we're always looking at ways to improve our measurements and ways to better leverage this information so that we can actually achieve truly better impact in the field. This session is about to close. I would just like to thank my panel one more time. Bajat in Istanbul, Sumitra in New York, Bruno in Paris, and Dr. Robert Pepper and Thierry, along with myself here in London. Thank you very much indeed, and we look forward to discussing the GITR 2016 in around 12 months' time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.